Today on Public Research.
I think a lot of problem Democrats have, and this was true under Biden, of course, as well, is that they want to preserve what they've done in the past. They don't talk enough about what they want to do in the future. And, the slogan, Make America Great Again, is a brilliant slogan. Democrats should want to make the country great too, But you're not going to make the country great by just saying, let's preserve everything we did. Let's preserve everything we did. People want, and they have to fight to preserve Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, environmental protections. Yes, that's fine. But clearly we know Donald Trump, won twice and came close to winning a third time, that people who voted for him didn't want exactly what they already had. They're scared of the future, and they're right to be, because people's real wages haven't gone up very much in decades. And there's also, I think, there's a real fear out there about what the economic future really looks like.
Georgetown professor and historian Michael Kazin of Dissent magazine and author of What It Took to Win: A History of the Democratic Party joins me to discuss the future and past of the Democratic Party, the timidity of the Kamala Harris campaign, reasons she lost to Donald Trump, the quest to expand the social safety net in an age of AI, how Democrats should navigate thorny issues like trans sports and immigration, and other lessons for a Democrat nominee in the 2028 election. So, have you read the campaign book, Fight, about the last election by any chance?
I have not. I think I read a little bit about it, but I haven't read it. No.
Okay. So I want to share this excerpt from the book.
Deese counseled that Harris should not roll out any plans that were not already in the president's budget. The stated purpose was to make sure that her promises did not score. Washington speak for cost too much. Trump had a website full of videos promising popular policies that would run up annual deficits and the national debt by trillions of dollars. Seemingly every day he added to that pile. Harris's new campaign team, the old Biden guard, put on their green eye shades just when she needed to be motivating voters along the blue wall. A patchwork of small-bore ideas became her economic agenda. Sure, Harris could play around the edges. She could speak loftily about an opportunity economy, taking on corporate greed, and expanding the child tax credit. But Biden's loyalists drew a hard line at anything that smacked of a rebuke of the president's record.
I'll just stop it there.
I get the idea. I get the idea.
So my question is, how does the Democratic Party go from, the party of FDR, of LBJ, of, sort of that a chicken in every pot kind of politics, to a point where Kamala's running, the Democrats are saying, we cannot let Trump win. I think rightly, this guy tried to do a coup. This is so important. We can't let him win. And then behind the scenes, they're like, well, yeah, we can't score. We got to be we got to worry about the deficit, so we can just do tax credits. How does that happen?
Well, the irony, as you know, Daniel, is that actually a lot of things Biden did, or at least tried to do, were pretty bold, really. The IRA, the original Build Back Better idea. It was very much sort of a green economy with lots of infrastructure, with union jobs, supported the PRO Act, of course, which would make it easier to organize private sector unions. And that didn't get through because the Democrats weren't willing to do away with the filibuster when they had control of the Senate. I don't know exactly why Biden's team, which became Harris's team, became so timid. I think part of what was going on was that Harris herself is not a good politician. She was fine in California, but as you know, her campaign in 2020 didn't even make it to 2020, even though it had a big send-off originally. And I think also she believes, as unfortunately a lot of people in deep blue areas who are Democratic actors believe, was that people care more about the issues they care about than they actually do. Care more about democracy, for example. Look, the very idea that that Trump egged people on to try to overturn an election that he lost. And then, of course, one of the first acts this year was he pardoned people who did that, is outrageous. Unfortunately, most Americans don't care enough about that. At least Americans who are the swing voters don't care enough about that. They care about what the government's doing for them or to them. And this was so. I think she cared more about her last big address. I was there for it actually. She gave it at the Ellipse, right next to the White House. There was a huge crowd. It was all about democracy, all about saving democracy. Well, unfortunately, that's rather abstract to most people. They think, well, we have elections, right? So that's democracy. We don't have to worry about that. We still have elections. So I think that's part of the problem. But one of the ways Democrats became timid about the economy was that they felt they were losing votes back in the 1980s to Republicans. To 3 straight presidential elections, Republicans won easily, landslides in 1980 and 1984 under Ronald Reagan, and then almost a landslide in 1988 under George H.W. Bush. And so to that point where Democrats, those associated with Democratic Leadership Council especially, began to say, well, look, we can't come up with these big New Deal-ish, Great Society kind of ideas, programs, because we're going to lose if we do that, because that's not what Americans want anymore. And they also felt unions had got too powerful, just as unions were actually getting less powerful. But nevertheless, this was a sort of generational transition in many ways. And these were young people, too. These were people like Joe Biden and Al Gore and Bill Clinton, who were not older politicians. They wanted to break away from what they saw as a sclerotic, New Deal-ish, big government, big union image of the party. And so some ways, some Democrats are still dealing with that hangover, I think.
It's just so bizarre that Trump was just promising whatever. He didn't give a damn about the.
Well, he's still doing that. I mean, just today, I don't know when this will air, but just today, he's going to give an executive order. He says cutting drug prices by 80%.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he can do it, but he'll say he can do it. So
it's funny. It's like Trump will promise whatever to win.
Of course.
And the Democrats have become, well, we got to be fiscal. That would score. We can't do that. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot is we have this there's so much meaningless cliche in how we talk about politics, especially Democrats and stuff. Kamala had my opportunity economy agenda.
What would you do day one?
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy.
Which to an average person means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that was the emptiest phrase I've heard,
Yeah.
Even though I was canvassing in Pennsylvania, in a red area of Pennsylvania, and there were billboards saying, we should have a $15 minimum wage all over the whole country. So, she was trying to do some things. She was trying to have it both ways, if you will.
Yeah. Well, but I've been thinking about it in a broader sense, like how many times I've heard people say, for instance, this line, Democrats need a message that's focused on the economy. And think about that. Like, what does that actually mean? It means nothing. What is that? Or I told you about this Andy Bashir clip, where they said, what's your vision for a party? He says, Democrats need to be the party of jobs and accessible health care.
We as the Democratic Party are going to be the party of jobs, of accessible health care.
What is that? What does that mean? And I'm trying to promote, because I think it's so dangerous of Vance. I'm more scared of Vance and Tucker than Trump, frankly. So it's so important that we win the next election to keep them out. And I'm trying to promote to Democrats this, what I call, become more primitive. Think like a caveman. View everything like a caveman. If I vote for you, what do I get? Very concrete. Because if they had thought like that, they would have seen that the opportunity economy doesn't pass the caveman test.
I think it's more that effect. If you're up, about this, I think I wrote a piece about this for The Nation. I think a lot of problem Democrats have, and this was true under Biden, of course, as well, is that they want to preserve what they've done in the past. They don't talk enough about what they want to do in the future. And the slogan "Make America Great Again" is a brilliant slogan. Democrats should want to make the country great too, but you're not going to make the country great by just saying, let's preserve everything we did. Let's preserve everything we did. People want, and they have to fight to preserve Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, environmental protections. Yes, that's fine. But clearly we know Donald Trump, won twice and came close to winning a third time, that people who voted for him at least twice didn't want exactly what they already had. They're scared of the future, and they're right to be, because people's real wages haven't gone up very much in decades, and there's also, I think, there's a real fear out there about what the economic future really looks like, what kind of jobs people are going to have, especially people who don't have college educations. Even a lot of people do have college educations. AI could do away with their jobs too. So I think that Democrats have to be really progressive in the literal sense. What kind of society do they want to look to in the future? What that's going to look like, and so in that sense, I think Democrats are timid because they haven't confronted the fact that bold ideas about fixing the problems that people feel in their regular lives are what they have to talk about. And the Republicans do that to a degree. Trump shoots himself in the foot all the time as well, as you know, with the tariffs and so forth. But he does grab people's attention because he seems to be talking about a very different society.
Yeah, one question I ask people, guess, is I'll ask it to you, but you probably know. But if Hillary won, what was she gonna do? What was she gonna give you? What was she gonna do for you?
Yeah, more of the same. More of the same.
No, but all my guests I asked that, they have no idea.
More of the same. I mean, look, I think she would have clearly tried to expand Obamacare. She, of course, was the healthcare person under. And that healthcare plan blew up in her face before we even got to a vote.
But I mean, like, to the average person, there was not a clear.
No, and that's a problem with Trump. I mean, Trump has been the most important, most consequential political figure of the 21st century because once he started to run, everybody reacted to him. He took over his party. The way, I hate to say it, the way FDR took over the Democrats, even the Democrats were already moving that way. And you could argue the Republicans were already moving that way even before Trump in some ways. But certainly on the social issues and the cultural issues, but no, you can't just react to this guy. You've got to give them something which is better.
Yeah, if you remember back before Trump came on the scene, back in those days, Republicans might have said something about Democrats like, Democrats, they just want to give everybody free stuff. And one of my pieces of advice for Democrats today is become that party. Stop. There seems to be this fear among Democrats that if we promise to give people stuff, that is somehow coarse, it's not respectable, it's not responsible. And so my question is, how do we get beyond, because if the Democrats run on a tax credit in 2028,
my plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start-up small businesses.
If you qualify for this subgroup, you'll get a $25,000 startup tax credit. We will lose, I am convinced. So how does the party get beyond tax credits?
Well, but Democrats have a problem that Republicans, for the most part, don't have. Though Republicans, as they get more working class voters, are getting more of that problem, is that Democrats are an unwieldy coalition. They're a coalition of people, like me, who would never vote for a Republican unless that Republican was, I don't know, Eugene Debs or something. Second coming of Eugene Debs. And people who are basically very well off and very well educated, and they're still the party of the majority of African Americans who don't have college educations for the most part, and still most Latinos. That's beginning to erode that support among Latinos. And obviously they get in New York City, they have votes for very poor people and very rich people at the same time. And the donors of the party, obviously are rich for the most part, the big donors. And some of those big donors actually are pretty progressive in economics, actually, but a lot of them obviously are not, like Bloomberg. So they have to somehow figure out how to combine those two groups. I agree with you, and I wrote about this in my history of the Democratic Party. The best way to do that is by supporting an economic system which seems to provide a decent life to most people. And how you do that, I think, Bernie Sanders' ideas are good ones for the most part, about universal health care and somehow making housing cheaper. And you've got to have more of a green economy. The problem there also, though, is it's not as easy as you might suggest. That is because Americans don't really trust the government to do stuff for them. That's part of what's happened the last 50 years, with real wages being stagnant for most people, with a general sense that the country is sort of in decline, slow decline. And of course, Trump feeds off that. He talks about countries ripping us off, other countries ripping us off, China ripping us off, et cetera. So Democrats have a tough time balancing those two. The idea of the Democrats are the party which wants the government to do things for people, give people stuff for free, as you say, and the Democrats are also the party which is identified with government, which a lot of Americans don't trust. So Biden had a great opportunity there.
No, I disagree, though. They don't think that's the problem. They no longer think of the Democrats as a party that I vote for them and I get free stuff.
Well, you might be right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Republicans still sometimes use that term. But you're right. Yeah. But no, even though I'm not sure Bernie Sanders would have been elected, I continue to think that Jewish socialists would have had a hard time winning the presidency in 2016 or 2020. But I've warmed up more to him over the years because he's been very good at straddling some of the hot button social issues, especially things like DEI, as well as really coming on with what in Europe would be considered a social democratic agenda.
I want to stay on the economics mostly, but I do want to touch on the cultural issues you just touched on. Bill Galston, do you know him?
Yeah, we actually debated in 2019 about which way the Democrats should go. He was in the center and I was more on the left.
So he was on Yasha Monk's podcast 2 days ago with Elaine Kmark, and they were sort of discussing this of what the Democrats should do. And it was interesting. As far as a positive agenda, basically all they had was we should make it easier to start small businesses because Latinos start small business. And what else? They had basically no agenda. It was odd. They had no positive agenda for the party, basically. But on the cultural stuff, they made a point that I thought that the party has to grapple with.
There is a kind of economic fundamentalism that's at work in a lot of progressive thinking. And the more we thought about that, the more we concluded that was just wrong, that might be true for progressive intellectuals, but by and large, it was not true for average Americans.
Cultural issues are emotional. They scare people. They frighten people. Okay, it's something they don't like. Emotion will always trump intellect. To understand the economic issues, it's sort of an intellectual process. Well, okay, what will stop inflation? Will this stop inflation? Will that stop inflation? You cannot, in fact, imagine getting an economic message through an electorate that is terrified by a changing culture that they don't understand and they don't agree with. And it's just human behavior. Immigration is both an economic issue, but it is a cultural issue. It runs deep into fear of the other, fear of losing, fear of, being taken over by people you don't know. And of course, Trump played on that absolutely beautifully. And then the transgender issue, which the Trump campaign used as a sledgehammer through last 5 weeks of the campaign.
It was also some of the specific policy positions that the party had taken. We found ourselves in the position of defending transgender women's participation in women's sports. That isn't what the politicians call an 80-20 issue. 80% opposed to that and only 20% in favor. You have to think very, very hard before adopting an 80-20 position. We also found ourselves in a situation in which we were defending, in effect, what Democrats call gender-affirming surgery for minors. And that really gives Americans the...
Okay, so, and I'm mindful of, I believe strongly in gay rights and the idea of, it's popular, let's just throw gay people or trans people in the trash is appalling. But let me put it this way. if they gave that ACLU questionnaire again, which was bizarre why they were asking it, or would you give free sex change surgeries to transgender illegal immigrants in jail? If they gave that to all the presumptive 2028 nominees, how would you tell them to answer that?
Well, clearly I'd tell them, that to try to dodge the question if they could. If they couldn't dodge the question, to say either one thing they could say is, look, that only happened twice in the whole country. But clearly that's a question you want to be on the wrong side of. And look, I think they're right. I don't agree with them on everything, certainly. We've had our differences, as I mentioned before, with Bill Galston. Actually, Elaine wrote a nice review of my book, but Washington Monthly. But I think this goes to the problem that I mentioned before, which is Democrats are a big tent, especially culturally. And there's a lot of black voters who vote for Democrats for good historical reasons and also current reasons about the economy, who are against abortion, who are against gay rights, and want to be tougher on crime as well, because they have a lot of crime in their communities. So Democrats have to find a way to convince their activists who care most about transgender rights and much more open borders to put that aside, for a while until the political situation is better, because you can't fight on all the issues at the same time. And a lot of that has to do with who the candidate is, I think, and also who that candidate appeals to and is able to recruit into the party. People who are in touch with voters in their own states, like one of my favorite Democrats in the country is Ben Wickler, who was, I think still might be the head of the party in Wisconsin. He ran for head of the DNC and didn't win this last cycle. But he says, look, if you fight about those issues on a local level, you learn, as a politician, you learn how to talk to people about them. You learn how to deal with people's fears to a certain degree. And look, one of the best things, ironically, that Trump has done probably is to basically close the border. So it's possible that issue will be less of an issue. The issue I think more Americans care about than any other and turned against Democrats more than any other was not transgender rights. It was immigration. Why do all these people in South Texas, who are Latinos, most of them themselves, decide to vote Republican last two elections rather than Democratic? Is because they feel their communities are inundated with people who speak Spanish like they do, but who are public charges, who took over a lot of the resources that they need. And these are poor people in South Texas for the most part. So there's a very good book called The Great Exception by a very fine historian, Jefferson Cowie, who argues that the New Deal era from the 1930s into the 1960s was possible in part because immigration was in effect cut off from everywhere but actually south of the border. And even there, immigration was not as large as it became later on because of immigration restriction laws that Republicans passed in the 1920s. So there was not this cultural fear of new people coming all the time, changing culture too quickly. So ironically, Trump could prove to be a boon for Democrats in the next election if, in fact, this cutoff of immigration continues.
You're in D.C. I don't know how many people you knew in the Biden administration. Why do you think, knowing how dangerous it was if Trump came back, that he basically changed the policy on the border? It led to a lot of new illegal immigration for the first 3 years of his admin. And then he just waits basically to the summer, like 6 months before the election, and then they changed it. Why did they do
Well,
that?
again, as I said before, there's a lot of pushback from pro-immigration activists who are an important part of the party. Look, one of the things that happened in the 1960s, and I was alive then, and I was to the left of Democrats back then, but then I became a Democrat with a capital D by the 1970s, is that the new leftists became part of the Democratic Party. New leftists whose agenda was culturally more radical, And I was one of those people. I mean, we were in favor of Black Power. We were in favor of gay and lesbian rights, as it was then called. We were in favor of very radical environmental ideas. We didn't talk about immigration much because it wasn't much of an issue. But if we talked about immigration, we would have been basically for open borders or something close to it, because we believe that nobody is any more equal than anybody else in the world. No one should have more privilege than anybody else. And nationalism was a bad idea. So, and people like me, even though we, became more compromising, we knew you had to win elections. At the same time, activists like me did become much more active in the party. And those movements from the 1960s, the Black freedom movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, the lesbian gay movement, they found a home within the Democratic Party. And that was a good thing in some ways because we had some important changes because of that. At the same time, it also made it much more difficult, I think, to compromise on some of these hot button cultural issues.
So I want to contend, but I'll just ask it. Has there ever been a better time to advocate for expanding the social safety net in America since the Great Depression than today?
Well, it was during the Great Recession, actually. And that's one of the reasons you did get Obamacare then, though narrowly, as you know. No, I mean, I think, look, I'm a social democrat, as I'd be called that in Europe anyway. Here we don't use that term, but I think it's always a good time to do it.
I asked that poorly. Let me just be more direct.
Yeah.
I think about an Uber driver with kids in Texas who's watching a report about Waymos, which are these driverless Ubers, basically. Right. Hey, they're sending Waymos to Texas. And I think about the fear that person must feel. Like real anxiety, almost physical terror, anxiety about this. And I hear it from people all over. It's long been insane that Italy has universal health care, a country that has no big tech companies. We have all these big tech companies, yet our politicians say, oh, we could never afford universal health care. That's always been crazy. But I feel like now is the time that people are really ready for a case of we need a much stronger social safety net so that we can look at these technological changes without so much terror, that we can catch people. Do you agree with that?
Yes, very much so. And that's what I was talking about before, the idea that Democrats have to talk about not what jobs are going to look like in the future, what housing is going to look like in the future. And most people want to work, they don't want, some basic, they don't want UBI, I mean, UBI might be necessary, but they don't want that. They want to be able to do a job which doesn't just pay them well, but also gives them a sense of, some sort of fulfillment, if only from their coworkers. And more jobs don't do that. As you said, the Uber driver, who maybe it's not probably his only or her only job, probably another couple jobs as well, right? But the Amazon driver, like in my neighborhood in DC, every day, 2 or 3 times a day, Amazon trucks are going by and dropping stuff off. And I sometimes talk to those workers, and they're working 2 or 3 jobs, and they're working all by themselves. It's pretty alienating stuff. And Democrats who can talk about trying to come up with a different future, you can't do it in some completely utopian way. That's not going to work. People understand they're not going to start making $30 an hour, doing a job that they love. That's not going to happen. But important, I think, that Democrats at least are talking about what that kind of future economy might look like. And I think you can do that within an environmental framework as well. Because again, most people don't agree with Trump. I think they do understand that climate change is happening and people have to prepare for that. But now how you do that is a different matter. So yes, of course, it's a larger safety net. But again, we have to deal with what people are going to do every day, whether they have a college education or not. And that's something that both Democrats and Republicans are struggling with. But Democrats could get ahead on that issue, I think. And of course, that also appeals to young people who, as you know, are the most alienated people from politics of anybody. I forget what's Generation Z, right? if you're 19 years old and you're getting out of high school, and what are you going to do? You go in the army? I mean, what are you going to do? If you can't go to college, it's a real problem.
There is this argument among economists where people are like, well, what are people going to, we're going to have this huge job loss. And they self-assuredly say, oh, no. This is just like people move into cities. We'll create new jobs we can't imagine, which has been true. I'm not so sure if that's true with this next step with the humanoid robots. Humanoid robots are finally getting cheap. There's now one you can buy from China for like $6,000, and it's amazingly capable. We're getting pretty close to where they're going to have the cleaning robots and stuff, not fully, and then the Waymos and stuff. Which side do you land on as far as, are we going to have a real sort of unemployment issue?
Again, I'm not an economist.
Yeah.
I'm a historian.
Yeah.
I can tell you a lot about how the past happened. I
Yeah.
can't tell you much about
Yeah.
how the future is going to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, it's a problem that Democrats should be talking about, because Republicans aren't talking about it because they're all in favor of a lot of these industries. These industries are often funding them, funding their campaigns. I think as well as talking about supporting people, whatever they're doing. I mean, job retraining is something which in other countries happens in a more centralized way, in a more planned way. In this country, it happens, well, if you're lucky, maybe there's a community college near you, which is also connected to an industry near you. But it's completely ad hoc. There's no national planning for retraining for jobs that actually exist or will exist in the future.
Well,
and that's something else I think that Democrats ought to be talking about. Again, Biden talked about some of this, at least he mentioned some of this, but imagine if instead of Joe Biden as president for the last 4 years, it was, I don't know, think of or Obama for that matter, or Josh Shapiro, or somebody who's just a better communicator. I think they would have won re-election, in 2024. We forget that despite the fact that, yes, there's a lot of contextual problems that the Democrats have. That's true. But we forget how terrible a politician Joe Biden was in those last few years. In those years in the White House, for the most part. He didn't explain, for example, 2021, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about this. 2021, the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. He should have gone on television, explain why that happened, explain that Trump had actually set up a situation where the plan where the U.S. was going to pull troops out, and he was just carrying that out, apologizing for what went wrong, being empathetic. Instead, I don't remember what he did, but and the fact I don't remember, and I'm a news junkie, means most Americans had no idea if he was saying anything about it. And from that point on, his popularity rating went below 50% and it never recovered.
What do you think should be the Democrats' policy on healthcare? I've come to the view that the German model is probably less scary than, NHS. It's way too scary for Americans.
Yeah, most doctors aren't going to want to work for the government.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
What do you think the Democrats' their healthcare policy should be in 28?
Again, I'm the one person to ask about this.
Right.
I'm not a policy guy. As long as people are covered and it's not too expensive. And look, Americans do want to choose their doctor as much as possible. Look, most Americans can't choose their doctor. That idea that was pushed under Obamacare, that doesn't happen. If you work, I can't really choose my doctor either. I make a very good income, work for Georgetown, but I get Georgetown Health Plan, and I've got a series of doctors who are part of the Georgetown health system. It's very cheap because I pay a lot of money monthly, but I don't get to choose any doctor I want. I choose from like 5 doctors who are taking new patients,
So I know you're a historian, but is there any, if they came to you and said, all right, what should some of the policy that we should offer and highlight? Do you have any ideas you would say?
Again, I just think about the objectives, The objectives are inexpensive and access to...
Oh, no, I didn't mean on healthcare. I just meant broadly, like for
Oh,
the
yeah.
yeah.
Well, a lot of things you're talking about. A minimum wage of at least $50 an hour, if not $18 an hour. Again, everybody being have health care, building a lot more housing. I mean, I've been reading something about this abundance, idea that Ezra Klein and other folks are talking about, and I agree with it to a certain extent. That is, I think it's important to build more housing, whether or not it's public housing or not, but to make it easier to do that. I think it's important to have high-speed rail where that's possible. And I think all that's right. And if you have to relax some of the regulations about that, that's fine with me. As long as those projects are projects which people really need, and really want. And also, I think, as I said, thinking about a future economy where there are good jobs for all, but not just saying that, but figuring out what that might actually mean. So those are some of the things I talk about. And also, I would continue talking about in ways that I think people understand and appreciate, which is, you can talk about equity in ways that are not, you have to sign a certain woke statement in order to get a job. I think people understand that it's not a bad idea to have more women and Black people and Hispanics, in various positions. And also, you have to talk about women's autonomy. There's a good reason why Trump has stopped talking about abortion, because he knows it's not a popular issue to talk about right to life stuff anymore. And internationally, I think it's a problem. I don't know if we want to get into that, but that's, you can't just talk about domestic issues. That's not the world we live in, and it never has been, really, at least in my lifetime. I grew up during the Cold War, after all. And there is a real problem, because Americans don't want to fight in wars where they're not attacked. On the other hand, we don't want the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians and the Indians to run the world either. So Democrats have to have a position on that, which is not just NATO's a good thing.
I want to ask about DSA. I've been, and whether you like or don't like the pro-Palestine protests and stuff, one thing I've been just so impressed by is I've thought to myself, first of all, compare the number of protests to the protests of the Afghan war, which actually involved American soldiers. It's like nothing. It's not even comparable. And I also think I would love to get just 5% of this amount of activity and activism for universal health care. But that seems impossible. Why is that? Why can't we get 5% of that activity? After this brutal war is over, for any kind of economic left, I almost feel like I'm the only socialist trying to, like what do you think?
Well, I mean, Daniel, can you think of a time when there have been mass protests for a economic program? I mean,
that's true.
People protest because they're angry about something.
Right.
They protest because people are dying who they don't think should be dying. That's why anti-war protests are always larger, even though and protests for civil rights were large too, because people felt abused. And healthcare is a more complicated situation, as you know, because most Americans are covered by healthcare, as you know, even though it can be lousy healthcare, they are covered. So it's not as if you're saying stop something. And I was surprised, actually, during Obama's administration, when he was, trying to get a more universal system than he got, because he wanted to have a public option, right? Before that was torpedoed by people like Joe Lieberman. But there are a few demonstrations for it. I went to some on Capitol Hill, and actually they were tiny, maybe 1,000 people, 1,500 people, because it seemed to be, policies complicated. I'm a historian of social movements, among other things, and social movements arise because people are deeply pissed off. That's why they happen, and they think the only thing we can do, the only way we can change the situation we hate, is by going out in the streets and being angry. And that healthcare is not the kind of issue.
Yeah, That's you're right on that. Can I ask you a question that troubles me? I'm Jewish. I don't know if you're religious.
Yes, I'm Jewish as well.
Yeah. There is this trend among the young left, who I agree with on like healthcare and stuff, of saying Zionists are the new neo-Nazis. And that, and this is, it sounds crazy, but this is now a popular view, that there's this streamer, Hasan Piker, says we should treat anyone who's, he said, even said anything positive about Israel, ever, like neo-Nazis.
This will never happen, but in a totally just world, any kind of fucking Zionist tendency should be treated in the same way as being a fucking rabid neo-Nazi. And you shouldn't even let someone be the fucking local dog catcher as Felix was posting, if they've ever exhibited any sort of like positive feelings about the state of Israel. I'm so serious about this.
Like, and in the DSA, they've talked about banning Zionists and stuff like that. I find that very offensive, considering the Tree of Life victims were probably all 11 of them were Zionists. So calling them neo-Nazis is like saying that was intra-Nazi violence. Do you have any thoughts on this sort of growing radical view?
Yeah, well, it's appalling, clearly, but the context obviously matters, which is as long as Netanyahu's been in power, it's gotten worse and worse. Obviously, more settlements on the West Bank and the decision to basically destroy Gaza, whether you call it genocide or not, it's horrible. And Hamas is not destroyed, even though they're much weakened, of course. And that has made anybody left of center, mostly, especially those who aren't Jewish, Israel's become a pariah, and that's terrible. And look, I've never been a Zionist myself. I come from a very, very secular, family. My mother's side, anyway. My father was a Jewish intellectual, pretty well known at the time, Michael Kazin, but he was always a liberal Zionist, but I think it's a terrible tragedy that after 1967 there wasn't when labor Zionists were in power for many years there, they didn't make a serious attempt to figure out how to have two states. At this point, most Israelis aren't in favor of that either, because partly even before October 7th they weren't in favor of it. So it's awful, and I don't know how you convince those young people, as long as this war goes on, and as long as Netanyahu is in power, that Israel is not just awful by definition. It's important to try, I guess, and I certainly I have students who say similar things, and I talk to them about how Israel is run by a terrible government, but it has, for all its history, been surrounded by people who did want to destroy it. That's important to understand. And they say, oh yeah, I guess that's right. And if Israel lost one war, they would be lost, and that was not true for the Germans. But at the same time, young people react to suffering, and they should. All people react to suffering, but young people react to it, and this is suffering which is what's happened in Gaza, as you know, has been supported by the arms of the United States and by American taxpayers. So I hate what these folks you're talking about are saying about Israel, at the same time as I hate what Israel's done in Gaza. So it's difficult to straddle those two emotions.
Right. I want to close on maybe this anti-Semitism and sort of what's going on in the Republican Party, because it really scares me. Do you know Max Blumenthal?
I know his. I know his father pretty well, Sidney. Yeah, but I've never met Max. Luckily, he seems like a crazy person.
Okay, but you're aware of him.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
He began his career, he did a video for SPLC investigating David Irving, exposing Holocaust deniers. We are marching to
Are you a Holocaust denier?
No, good Lord, no. If anyone reads my books, takes the trouble to read my books, they'll see the facts.
But when I challenged Irving, the hardcore Holocaust denier came out of his shell. You said more people died on the backseat of Edward Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick than ever died in a gas chamber at Auschwitz. How is that not denying?
The right quotation, the actual quotation, more people died on the backseat of Edward Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick, meaning the one woman, Mary Jo Kopechne.
Do you know that he's begun to use the neo-Nazi term Zog?
I used to think Zionist-occupied government was an anti-Semitic term. Now I'm forced to see it as a pretty accurate description of the reality we live in as one nation under Zog.
One nation under Zog? That's the term Zionist-occupied government? I mean, yeah.
I was going to call our stream
I could play a clip for you right now where he says,
doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me. And look, he also he's he basically said that Ukrainians, are Nazis and supported Putin. I wrote a piece for Dissent a couple of years ago when people like him were basically saying the U.S. should not support Ukraine.
Well, there's a growing group of people who say they're on the left who now defend and use the term Zog, which is
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's I could show you. It's very alarming.
Well, look, it's a logical extension of believing that Israel can have whatever it wants from the government. So,
with the Gen Z right, it really alarms me what is going on. There's a song by Kanye West that just came out. I'm not sure if you're aware, called "Hail Hitler."
Yeah, I started to watch it, and I said, "No, I don't want to watch this."
There appears to be that there's a new multiracial, multicultural, even far right among Americans under 35, and the glue of it is anti-Semitism because some of them are Muslim and Arab, and some. So the one thing they can agree on is we hate the Jews. How much does that alarm you? How bad do you think it could get?
Well, it alarms me. The problem is they're not going to get support from the top of the Republican Party for that, because the top of the Republican Party, of course, is very pro-Israel. Now you can be pro-Zionist and anti-Semitic, I guess, but it's a little tough, I think, to keep that particular combination together for very long. And again, I don't know enough about this part of the far right now and how powerful they are, especially how powerful they are within the Republican Party. I mean, there were always crazy people on the extremes of both sides. Look, I was part of a New Left at the time that believed that we were going to bring about a better society by bombing people, and we cheered American soldiers being killed in Vietnam. So I think it alarms. Look, anti-Semitism obviously alarms me. Even if I wasn't Jewish, it would alarm me. I just don't know whether this is a blip, culturally, or whether this is a long-term thing. And of course, Max Blumenthal is Jewish, right? So he'd have a hard time aligning with these people, you would think.
Yeah. So it's true. Trump is pro-Israel, but who's his successor? Vance. Okay. And who was Vance with on election night? Who's he closest with? Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure. Are you aware that he's promoted this Holocaust denier on a recent episode? He mused aloud, maybe it would have been better if Hitler had won the war.
I don't want to be dark. I know this is going to be clipped, but at this point, Europe is so, and I love Europe and I'm there constantly and I have family there. I mean, I really love Europe truly as an American. Yeah. But it's so degraded, I don't even want to say it. I'm not even going to say would it actually be worse or not. But it's pretty bad right now.
Really? Yeah. I didn't know that.
Joe Rogan, the largest podcast, also hosted this Holocaust denier named Daryl Cooper. Tucker hates Israel.
This goes back to Pat Buchanan, actually. Talk about history. And Pat Buchanan, in many ways, is the godfather of MAGA. And you weren't old enough, but you probably know that Pat Buchanan talked about we got to get the pro-Israel people out of the party. He says they're all in the amen corner. And we got them out of the party. And that in some ways we're returning to that, except for the fact that look, I mean, Trump wants to bring about this great, peace in the Middle East. He wants to, of course, be the greatest president of all time, and he can't do that unless he puts the Israelis and the Saudis together. And of course, in the base of the party, especially the Christian base, some of whom are anti-Semitic, but they're very pro-Zionist. So he'd have a hard time there. So I think you could be anti-Semitic, but if you hate Israel, that's more of a problem in the Republican Party.
Does Vance worry you?
Yeah, he's a smart guy, unlike Trump. I mean, Trump is smart at performing. He's brilliant at performing. That's why he's where he is. But he doesn't care about policy. Never has. No, Vance is smart, and Vance actually wrote his own book, unlike Trump, who didn't write his own books. And Josh Hawley scares me too. Josh Hawley has a lot of friends among the unions, especially the Teamsters, and he's against defunding Medicaid in any way. What scares me in the Republicans is they come up with a figure maybe like Vance, maybe like Hawley, others who are able to be culturally conservative, all the ways that Trump is, as well as supporting a larger safety net. They can be in some ways like the Rassemblement National in France, the right-wing populists in France, and in some ways other right-wing populists in Europe as well. That put the welfare state together with right-wing cultural issues. That's scary to me because I think they're not going to get huge majorities that way, but they could probably get a durable majority for a while with that combination.
Who if you could bring people back from the dead, when you look at the Democrats' history, who are some of the politicians or maybe the strategists that you would sort of put on the all-star team if you could to run,
Yeah. Well, to have a victorious party, a party that can win, as the title of my book has it, you need to build broad coalitions of people who are willing to work with one another for common ends. And some of the Tammany Hall bosses did that, and even in reformist ways. Their last really powerful Tammany Hall boss, a guy named Charles Murphy in the early 20th century, he kept together his basically Irish machine, but he brought in new immigrants, Jews, Italians, Poles, and others in New York City. And also he realized that at a time when a lot of Americans were pissed off at big corporations, you had to bring about a much more progressive social policies and economic policies. So Robert Wagner, the senator from New York State, who gave his name to the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, in the 1930s, when he was a senator, he started in Tammany Hall. So did Al Smith when he was a very progressive Democrat. Alfred E. Smith, who then ran for president in 1928 after he'd been governor of New York for several terms. So bringing together sort of all these different ethnic groups and under a progressive, group of economic and social policies, that's the kind of thing that Tammany Hall was able to do, at least part of its history. Then obviously FDR, who was a great speaker, a great communicator, a great empathizer, who was able to, again, keep together this broad coalition of people who are basically communists. Late 1930s, the communists basically supported FDR because of the Popular Front against fascism. And these awfully racist Southern Democrats. I mean, that is about as broad a coalition as you can imagine in American politics. But he kept them together because they supported more of a safety net. They supported, having your bank deposits insured. They supported Social Security and a lot of new government jobs in the Works Progress Administration. A minimum wage and maximum hours for the first time. Other bills as well. So FDR, now that was an unusual thing because he was elected during the Great Depression, but he knew what to do with that crisis. And other Democrats like Biden have not been so good at knowing what to do with that crisis. Same with Obama. Other figures, well, someone more recently who's still in Congress, I think doesn't get enough respect. That's Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, first of all, her biography bridges two different sides of the Democratic Party. She comes up through a working class Catholic family in Baltimore. Her father was a very important congressman for a while, and her brother was mayor for a while. And then she moves to San Francisco with her husband, who's a big finance guy. And so she was able to combine, being an early supporter of gay rights in San Francisco, where, of course, gay people were very important and are a very important constituency, with still understanding how white working class people were thinking. And also, she knows how to count votes, and she knew how to push for programs which she knew would be popular once they were there. Great example is Obamacare, is the ACA. When that was in trouble in 2009, 2010, and Rahm Emanuel was telling Obama, don't do it, just cover kids. It's not popular. She said, no, once this is there, people will like it and it'll be popular. We'll be able to expand it. And she was right about that. As you see now, Trump tried to get rid of the ACA in his first term. John McCain helped to kill that. And now he wouldn't try to do that because he knows that, people like getting health care. So she's a figure who doesn't get enough respect because she's not a great speaker, but that's not the job description as a powerful Speaker of the House. So you've got to keep your party together and you got to push for changes which will be important once they get passed.
Do you see any villains for a lot of people, like for instance Clinton and Carter, even neoliberalism? Those are the villains. Are there any villains when you sort of look back at it?
Well, look, for a long, long time, the Democrats, of course, were the party of first of slavery, and then of Jim Crow, and some of those figures did good things for their own people, for white people in the South. I have a part of a chapter in the book about bosses, both North and South, and the boss in the South I profile was a guy named Benjamin Tillman, who was governor of South Carolina and then a senator from South Carolina, and Ben Tillman was in favor of support for agriculture in the state. He supported a new university. Clemson University was founded when he was governor. He was opposed to the bankers having a lot of power. He's called Pitchfork Ben Tillman because he wanted, during the Great Depression in the 1890s, he said he wanted to stick Grover Cleveland, the president, who was president of his own party, with a pitchfork. But at the same time, he was just horrible. He basically said, "Oh, lynching's okay because those black men who were lynched, they probably did rape white women. If even they didn't, they need to know their place." And so Democrats who were basically racial terrorists,
obviously the segregation. I meant like sort of recently. I just want to close on this. I just want to ask crassly, who do you like for 2028?
Whoever can win. I don't know. I think so much depends on what happens in 2026. Democrats take back the House. Trump is unpopular. Then even if Vance runs and is a nominee who's skillful in many ways, but he's not Trump. He doesn't have that charisma.
He's not funny.
He doesn't have that capability to dominate the news at every point, because people sort of, what did he do next? What did Trump do next?
And he's not funny. Trump's funniness is a real
weapon. And off the cuff, he doesn't. Teleprompters are his enemy. He hates them. So so much depends what happens then. If Trump is unpopular, that political scientists will tell you, I think they're right, that political science is often wrong, but sometimes they're right. What they're right about, I think, is that most people vote in presidential election by how they think those who aren't loyalists for either party, those who really matter in the middle. Most people don't vote in other elections besides the midterms, besides the presidential election, which is maybe 15-20% of the electorate. Those people vote on the basis of what they think, how they think the incumbent party has done. If they think Trump has done pretty well, then unfortunately they probably won't elect a Democrat, no matter who that Democrat is. If they think that Trump has not done well, then the chances are they'll support the Democrat, unless the Democrat's just awful. But I think Democrats are enough of a party that they can find somebody who is acceptable to those people. Who that is, of course, in my heart, I love it to be AOC, but I don't think she can win, to be honest with you. I think she's got to win statewide first in New York, which is possible. I think she can win statewide, actually. I didn't think that a few years ago. I think she could now. But I think probably a governor is a safer pick, especially a younger one who's articulate, like a Shapiro. Maybe like Whitmer, if she can get past her binder on the face moment.
I think Whitmer, first of all, are you sure about running a woman?
I don't think it's the woman part. I think, look, if Harris had run beginning in March, and had figured out a way to get a more effective campaign, she didn't lose by that much. Remember, something like I did the numbers. Other people have done. I think 230,000 votes in those three Midwestern states. If she'd won 230,000 more votes, she would have won those states. She still would have lost the popular vote. But as we know, who cares about the popular vote anymore, right? So she would have won. So it wouldn't have taken much,
Yeah, she was
despite what a bad candidate she was.
She was horrible. When I was watching Simon Rosenberg say she was a great candidate.
I still think Kamala Harris ran an incredible campaign. She was given a very tough assignment.
Are these people just saying this because this is how they make their living?
I don't know Simon Rosenberg. Yeah.
But when all these people say she did a great job, are they just trying to get a contract or what is going on?
I think there's a way in which some people want to believe that it's always the other side's fault. That they want to believe. Look, I remember election day, I was shopping, and I'm in Washington, D.C., which, of course, is the bluest state, so-called state in the country. Not state in the country. And I saw a couple signs on people's lawns saying, Harris, obviously. And that to me was both kind of cute, but also a sign of a real, let us say, lack of understanding of what was going on in the country.
The thing about Whitmer, though, I was listening to her, she talks like it's such typical politician talk.
Yeah, well, you got to deal with that. Look, the most effective articulator in the country is Buttigieg of the Democrats, but you got to elect a guy who's a gay guy who was only elected to the mayor of a university city, a college city. I don't know. College town.
Okay. Oh, well, I thank you so much for giving me your time. I really appreciate it. Please promote anything you would like.
Well, obviously, I like this book.
What It Took to Win.
And right now I'm writing a book about Samuel Gompers and the rise of the American labor movement. Wow. So when that comes out, if you're still doing this, happy to talk about it.
I think Pat Buchanan was a big fan of his.
Was he really? I didn't know that.
On immigration, I think. Right?
Yeah, he was a real immigration restrictionist, that's for sure. But look, he was Jewish too. Most people don't know the most important labor leader in American history was a Jewish atheist.
Oh, I didn't know he was Jewish.
Yeah. He was. His parents were Dutch, and they moved to England before he was born, and they were married in the Great Synagogue of London. All his family over here was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Brooklyn, the Washington Cemetery. But Gompers was not because after his first wife died, he married a Gentile, and so he was not allowed to be buried in the Jewish cemetery. So he's buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Tarrytown, New York, right next to Andrew Carnegie.
Wow!
So there you go. Wow. The Odd Couple. So.
Well, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.